The first sound was not wind, but warning. A single howl cut through the cemetery like glass through fabric, clean and final. Mourners froze mid-motion, black coats peppered with white flakes. From the tree line, a shape tore free, enormous, silver-white, muscles flashing under frost. Shadow crossed graves in seconds, snow detonating beneath his paws. Panic broke formation, 50 hearts sprinted without direction. Beneath the flag-draped coffin, something small trembled once. The air changed temperature, as if breath itself remembered it belonged to the living. In that second between faith and fear, the wolf became the axis of belief. Guns lifted, prayers stopped halfway. The animal ignored both. He knew where to go. He always had. Shadow reached the little casket and reared upright, claws dragging crescents through paint still wet from morning touch-ups. Wood answered with a muffled thud. Heartbeat or echo, no one knew. Frost steamed off his fur, each breath visible, desperate, purposeful. The flag slipped, colors dimming against snow. People shouted, but sound failed to travel. The storm swallowed everything but rhythm. The wolf pressed his ear to the lid, listening, waiting for confirmation only he could interpret. When he found it, his body went still, then violent again, tearing at the seal between worlds. Powder exploded upward, coating his muzzle like ash. Somewhere under all that weight, something human shifted. The line between miracle and madness blurred into fog.
Colton Briggs had fired at grizzlies, at men, at nothing when fear demanded proof. Yet now his hand refused the holster. The wolf's movements weren't random. They had grammar. Each strike carried intention, not hunger. Deputies circled, boots sinking, eyes flicking toward command that never came. The radio on Briggs's shoulder crackled a useless prayer for backup. He tasted iron in the air, the scent of something electric, life rediscovering itself. He lowered his weapon. The sound of restraint became louder than gunfire. He realized leadership sometimes meant believing in something insane for 10 more seconds than anyone else could bear. Those 10 seconds stretched long enough for destiny to breathe. Age had thinned Martha Vale's body, but sharpened her courage. She pushed through the crowd, coat unbuttoned, gray hair alive in the wind. Her voice rose not from lungs, but conscience. She had seen this moment forming behind frosted windows 3 nights ago. A man, a glass of milk, a shaking hand. The sight had branded itself under her eyelids. Now guilt became momentum. She shouted for them to wait, to trust the animal. Snow caught in her eyelashes like salt. The sheriff hesitated. That was enough. Truth cracked open the way ice breaks when pressure finds weakness. Martha stood beside the beast and became larger than her fear had ever allowed. The crowd parted for inevitability. Gloves met cold metal. Latches snapped like tiny gunshots. The lid lifted an inch, then another, air rushing in as if vacuumed from heaven. For one heartbeat, the world forgot how to move. Then Nurse Dana Porter dropped to her knees, 2 fingers searching, finding. The faint pulse under skin, colder than marble, pulsed again, defiant. She gasped, but no words came, only tears that steamed against the frigid air. Behind her, Shadow lowered his head, breath brushing the child's cheek through distance and faith. The impossible recalibrated itself into fact. Somewhere, a crow screamed and fled the sky, as though even omens were being rewritten. Reverend Paul Mercer had buried soldiers, infants, entire families claimed by winter, but never had he seen death hesitate. He knelt in snow that soaked through cloth, hands trembling between scripture and science. His Bible lay half open, pages stiff with ice, verses curling toward the living. He whispered something nameless, not plea, not command, a raw vibration asking existence to reconsider. The wolf remained motionless, haloed by breath vapor that looked suspiciously like incense. For one moment, church and wilderness shared the same altar. Above them, clouds broke just enough to show one ruthless, beautiful slice of sun. The prayer landed. The monitor in Nurse Porter's hand flickered green.
Marla Hollis watched the coffin open, as if watching the ground betray her. Everything she had arranged with such precision, the doses, the signatures, the timing, dissolved in one exhale of frost. Her pulse sprinted, her face refused expression. She swayed, not from cold but from exposure. The lie had been airtight, now it leaked light. Ethan caught her elbow, but contact burned. Around them, whispers condensed into judgment. Cameras lifted. Every lens found guilt photogenic. Marla's knees folded. Snow cushioned the fall but could not disguise it. Shadow's gaze tracked her without malice, only comprehension. Predators know when prey is finished, even before the heart admits it. After violence comes stillness that feels like prayer. Shadow lowered himself beside the open coffin, chest rising slow, deliberate. Steam curled from his nostrils in twin ribbons. His eyes, glacier blue, reflected both worlds, one above, one beneath. He pressed his head to the child's small chest, listening again. The crowd held breath. Even the wind seemed to defer. A single twitch under his ear confirmed what science would later measure: faint, fragile rhythm. Shadow didn't move. Guardianship sometimes requires absolute immobility, the way mountains protect valleys by merely existing. Snow fell heavier, sealing them in a dome of silence. Time paused long enough for nature to amend its own laws. The first wail of sirens braided into the wolf's earlier howl, until no one could tell which called which. Red lights fractured across icicles, turning every tear into ruby. Paramedics sprinted through drifts, their urgency met by an animal refusing retreat. One tried to approach. Shadow's growl anchored him mid-step. Sheriff Briggs raised a hand. Wait. They waited. The stretcher touched the snow only when the wolf lifted his head, as if granting permission. This choreography of trust rewrote protocol. The medics lifted the child. Her lashes fluttered once, disbelief painted across faces trained to expect nothing. The sirens rose again, but now they sounded like applause disguised as alarm. Inside the ambulance, condensation traced veins on glass. Instruments beeped uncertainly, caught between hope and duty. Then, under blankets and oxygen, a sound escaped the child's throat, not speech, not cry, but the smallest inhale claiming ownership of air. Outside, through the rear window, the wolf trotted beside the vehicle, keeping pace. Snow turned to glitter under the strobe. Every witness understood they had crossed into legend, though none said it aloud. The town of White Ridge would wake tomorrow with its faith rearranged. For now, only one word existed, the one the girl whispered before sleep reclaimed her: Shadow.
Morning after the resurrection, White Ridge stopped pretending it was ordinary. Trucks idled longer at intersections. Store bells rang softer, as though afraid to disturb a miracle. The cemetery gates bore prints that refused to melt: wolf, boot, child, destiny overlapping. Newspapers from nearby counties arrived late, drivers slowing at the tree line where rumors said a guardian waited. In diners, spoons clicked carefully against mugs. Conversation never reached volume. Some claimed they'd seen blue eyes glowing near the ridge before dawn. Others swore it was headlights. Sheriff Briggs filed no report. He simply stood by the window of his office, hat in hand, listening to wind that sounded suspiciously like breathing. Belief was heavier than snow and twice as persistent. It coated roofs, coated hearts, and promised thaw only when truth finished blooming. Miles from town, the Hollis farm sat like a bruise on the landscape, beautiful from distance, painful up close. Fences leaned, silo rusted, soil hard as regret. Inside, unpaid bills nested beside photographs that remembered better harvests. Ethan's boots left dark halos of melted snow across warped floorboards. He traced a calendar ringed with red dates, deadlines, debts, doses, each circle tightening like a noose. Outside, the tractor engine coughed once, then surrendered, mirror to his lungs. He kept the radio on low for company. Country songs about redemption mocked him gently. Marla's perfume drifted from the kitchen, chemical and cold. For a moment he thought of his brother's uniform folded upstairs, the one he couldn't sell or wear. Then the phone rang, bringing the bank's voice that never apologized. The silence afterward was thicker than any snowdrift.
It arrived with routine cruelty. Plain envelope, official letterhead, numbers sharp enough to cut. Final notice, 30 days. Ethan read it once, twice, the words rearranging into hieroglyphs of failure. The paper trembled. The house seemed to lean closer, listening. Marla hovered behind him, arms folded, eyes calculating distance between loss and opportunity. Outside, the mailbox still gaped open, snow swirling in like laughter. He wanted to burn the letter, but flames require permission he no longer possessed. Instead, he folded it into his pocket like a weapon pointed inward. Upstairs, Tanner's cough echoed thinly. Destiny often hides behind ordinary sounds. The furnace clicked off, leaving them in mechanical silence. Ethan looked toward the barn, where ghosts waited in hay-dust light. Survival had started speaking a new dialect, one where morality was too expensive to pronounce. Fluorescent light bleached compassion from the clinic walls. Dr. Evelyn Cross studied test results that didn't belong to fate, but to manipulation. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to be terrifying. Platelets low, liver enzymes elevated, possible transplant. The words ricocheted off Ethan's ribs, each one heavier than debt. Marla listened like someone verifying calculations, not tragedies. Tanner swung his legs from the exam table, oblivious to the math being written on his future. Outside, sleet ticked against glass like a metronome counting down solvency. Dr. Cross folded her chart, concealing grief that had fermented into vengeance years ago. She didn't see a boy, she saw an equation that could finally balance her loss. Ethan signed forms he didn't read. Signatures are easy when hands shake for all the wrong reasons.
Back home, the calculator became judge and jury. $180,000 for land, $280,000 for surgery, interest accumulating like frost. Ethan punched keys until they blurred. The display flashed a sum too large for breath. Marla leaned on the counter, detached, her lipstick perfect against ruin. The refrigerator hummed its single-note requiem. Tanner's laughter drifted from the living room, bright, innocent, intolerable. Guilt carried a ledger too. Every memory of Henry Hollis saving him as a boy added a line of shame. He poured whiskey into arithmetic, but decimals refused mercy. Outside, the wind hauled clouds across the moon, dragging the farm into partial darkness. Numbers, he realized, don't kill hope. They just price it beyond reach. And when hope costs more than survival, men start selling pieces of their soul as down payment. Night slid over the farmhouse like black ink poured across paper already full of bad writing. Marla stood at the window, reflection flawless except for conscience absent. "There's Lily's trust fund," she said. Not as suggestion, but verdict. Ethan's silence became agreement by default. Her tone carried the crisp authority of someone rearranging furniture, not lives. The child's inheritance glimmered in her eyes like currency waiting to be converted. She spoke of procedures, paperwork, timing, using medical vocabulary as camouflage for murder. Ethan watched her lips move and felt the air thinning around them. Somewhere outside, a wolf's distant call threaded through wind, the universe offering one last audit before corruption finalized itself. Neither listened. They had already mortgaged their ears to desperation.
The diner's neon flickered Morse code through snowfall. Dr. Cross arrived smelling of antiseptic and insomnia. Marla of perfume engineered to mimic sincerity. Ethan sat between them, the hinge of betrayal. Coffee steamed like guilt pretending to be warmth. They spoke in numbers first, then logistics, finally silence. Dr. Cross slid a prescription pad across for Micah. Vitamins, she said, but truth lurked in Latin. Money exchanged hands under the table, a transfer colder than the coins outside. In that booth, grief met greed and found common language. The wolf's howl from the ridge reached faintly through the glass. None reacted. The waitress topped off their cups, unaware she was serving conspirators practicing civility. When they left, the booth retained heap like a scar. 3 days later, Lily May visited her parents' cross beneath drifts crusted with sunlight. The plastic flowers crackled, brittle reminders that memory freezes differently than flesh. She traced the carved letters of a surname she barely remembered, tiny glove leaving melted fingerprints. Behind her, Ethan watched from the fence line, guilt hiding under the pretense of guardianship. Marla waited in the truck, engine running, counting minutes like interest. In the forest fringe, Shadow observed, silent, white against white, a contradiction alive. The wind carried Lily's breath toward him. He tasted innocence diluted by something chemical and wrong. Instinct bristled. His tail lowered, muscles tense. Snow fell sideways, confused. Nature, it seemed, had decided to intervene again, but its warning system spoke only to those still capable of listening. For nights afterward, the hybrid patrolled the perimeter of human guilt. His world was scent, not rumor, and Lily's scent had changed, bitterness threaded through sugar. He tracked it from the woods to the porch where she left apple slices, gifts in exchange for protection. He didn't eat. He only observed the tremor in her hands as she placed offerings. Across the yard, Ethan smoked, pretending the fog was weather. Marla watched from curtains, eyes narrowing whenever white moved in darkness. Shadow memorized every door, every heartbeat inside that wooden box humans called home. The forest behind him hummed approval. When predators guard prey, the story of nature bends, and even stars reposition to watch. He waited for dawn. The time lies usually stretch their limbs. January arrived uninvited, dumping silence thicker than snow. Roofs sagged under accumulation of both. The thermometer mocked life with negative numbers. Each breath turned visible, as if truth demanded evidence. Inside, Lily coughed softly, unaware of poison disguised as medicine. Ethan avoided mirrors. Marla polished them. Outside, Shadow sat motionless at the tree line, snow crusting on his fur until he looked carved from it. The world seemed paused between inhale and exhale, the interval before tragedy finishes loading. Somewhere deep in the timber, branches cracked like bones predicting storm. The first flakes of the final blizzard began their descent, each one carrying a particle of consequence. By nightfall, they would blanket everything: innocence, guilt, and the faint path a wolf kept open toward redemption. Monday dawned too clean for evil. Orange juice glowed in a glass like sunlight trapped. Ethan's hands shook as he stirred powder that dissolved without trace. Lily bounced into the kitchen in socks, unaware of the chemistry lesson awaiting her veins. "Drink it all," Marla said from behind him, voice clipped, ordinary. The child obeyed, life swallowing death as easily as breakfast. Ethan watched the color drain from her cheeks across days, each morning another measure of poison disguised as care. At night he drank to forget, but the clink of ice mimicked the chime of her spoon. Outside, the snow kept immaculate records of footprints, his to the barn, hers to the bus stop, the wolf's circling both. The first dose changed nothing visible, just the trajectory of forgiveness already waiting for somewhere to land. Whiskey flattened sound, The barn absorbed his sobs the way hay absorbs light, slowly, without returning it. Ethan stared at tools that once built, now only remembered purpose. His brother's marine jacket hung from a nail like conscience made fabric. He whispered apologies to ghosts that never stopped listening. Above, wind pushed the roof into a low moan. He imagined Henry's voice inside it, calm, disappointed. The tractor seat became a confessional. He confessed to absence. Somewhere outside, shadows howl braided through the gust, primal, unjudging. Ethan gripped the bottle tighter. Regret is a poor anesthetic. It sharpens instead of dulls. When dawn bruised the horizon, he stumbled out to cold that did not care. Snowflakes landed on his lashes, melting instantly, leaving only proof that warmth still existed somewhere, just not in him.
3 nights into the slow poisoning, the forest refused its usual quiet. Deer scattered without scent of hunters, even owls went mute. Shadow prowled the ridge, tail low, nerves electric. Something was wrong in the rhythm of his world. He sniffed the trail leading to the Hollis house. Chemical tang threaded through the familiar sweetness of the girl's scent. Instinct fired alarms older than humanity. He whined, paced, scratched bark into ribbons. Wolves trust pattern, hybrids trust intuition, and his screamed. Beneath the moon, his reflection in a frozen creek showed both wild and domestic halves in conflict. He tilted his head, listening for confirmation no wind could carry, then howled, a sound stretched between prayer and warning. Far below, the farmhouse lights flickered, an organism coughing before collapse. While Ethan unraveled, Marla mastered routine. She cataloged Lily's symptoms like trophies: pallor, fatigue, slowed pulse. Her notebook filled with columns, her handwriting precise, almost elegant. At dinner, she smiled the way predators do before closing distance. Control, she told herself, is love rearranged for survival. She rehearsed sympathy in the bathroom mirror until it sounded rehearsed no longer. Each morning, she tightened the script, measured dose, fabricated concern, calculated silence. Guilt never visited. She had changed the locks. In bed, Tanner's breathing reminded her of the stakes, though even he had become arithmetic in her mind. Outside, wind pawed at windows, seeking entry. Inside, she stroked Ethan's hair when he wept, promising everything would be fine. Lies, when polished properly, reflect back something almost holy. In her clinic, Evelyn Cross stared at the photograph no one else was allowed to see. A boy in uniform, his grin young enough to still believe in rescue. Kyle had bled out in desert dust while Captain Henry Hollis led others to safety. Hero, the papers said. Abandoner, her heart replied. Grief hardened into something that resembled purpose. When Marla approached her months earlier, money wasn't the true incentive, vengeance was. She imagined balance, not blood. Yet now, as she prepared the final prescription, her reflection blurred behind the glass cabinet, 2 faces, doctor and executioner, trading dominance. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in town, ordinary tragedy continuing without her input. She envied its honesty. The pills rattled in her palm like bones predicting weather. She placed them in an envelope marked vitamins and sealed her last chance at absolution inside. Thursday afternoon, the classroom smelled of chalk and crayons. The teacher's voice floated through arithmetic when Lily's pencil slipped from fingers suddenly unsure. Her head tilted, eyes fluttering as if sleep had ambushed her mid-equation. Then gravity claimed her. Chairs scraped, children gasped, and the floor welcomed her too gently. The nurse arrived before comprehension did. By the time the ambulance lights painted the windows red, the room had learned the vocabulary of fear. In the forest, Shadow raised his head as if cued by invisible tether. He started running before sirens reached the highway.
Snow exploded around his body. Instinct knew distance, but not delay. Behind him, crows lifted in synchronized panic. Ahead, machines screened warnings meant for humans. Nature preferred action.
White Ridge Medical Center wore the same fatigue as its patients. Machines blinked lullabies of compliance. Lily lay beneath wires that hummed prayers in binary. Dr. Cross orchestrated the charade flawlessly. Tests ordered, jargon deployed, sympathy dispensed in clinical doses. Ethan signed forms with trembling authority, his guilt mistaken for grief. Marla wept photogenically in hallways. Shadow reached the edge of town that night, but stopped at sirens. His rules ended where human rules began. From a hill, he watched the building glow, artificial moon in the valley. Inside, Dr. Cross filled a syringe for tests that were never scheduled. Outside, snow fell steady, erasing footprints faster than conscience could. The monitors beeped slower each hour, composing the prelude to burial. Hospitals practice resurrection daily, but never expected to work backward. Monday night returned like an executioner keeping appointments. Marla prepared the glass with precision born of obsession. Ethan watched, hollowed by too many arguments with himself. The liquid looked innocent, like every lie that ever succeeded. Upstairs, Lily drew quietly, crayons leaving small confessions on paper. Family, sunlight, a white wolf watching from trees. Ethan carried the glass to her bedside, hands trembling. Her eyes, too blue, too knowing, searched his face but found only exhaustion. She drank because children trust more easily than gods forgive. The glass emptied, sealing her fate under domestic ritual. In the kitchen, Marla exhaled relief, mistaken for victory. Outside, Shadow's breath condensed against the window pane, forming a perfect circle around her silhouette. He waited. Nature never rushes revenge. It arrives exactly on time.
30 minutes later, the air inside Lily's room turned brittle. She called once, faintly, for her uncle, then for someone else. Shadow. Her voice crossed insulation, distance, morality, and found him. The wolf lifted his head miles away, ears swiveling toward the impossible. He began to move before heartbeat ceased. Inside, Ethan held her as color left her lips, his tears falling into her hair. "It hurts," she breathed, but he heard it as forgiveness. Outside, the horizon blurred under sudden snowfall. Shadow's sprint became flight, muscles igniting with ancestral memory, Rex's blood answering a command issued years before by another Hollis. By the time he reached the tree line overlooking the farm, the lights had gone out. Silence announced completion. The howl that followed cracked the sky into confession. At 11:34 p.m., paperwork declared what truth refused. Dr. Cross signed the line, her pen scratching finality into bureaucracy. Cause, cardiac failure. Secondary, congenital defect. Nobody questioned a signature so neat. Ethan collapsed against sterile tile. Marla maintained composure built from calculation. The child's body cooled under hospital lights that revealed nothing except human arrogance. Outside, a blizzard gathered like an audience awaiting Act Two. Shadow prowled the perimeter, unseen, his breath fogging glass doors automatic enough to open for ghosts. The nurse dimmed monitors, unaware she was dimming history's patience. Somewhere in the snow-laden forest, the story inhaled again, preparing to roar back at the world that had mistaken paperwork for power. The death certificate fluttered in a draft no one noticed, an omen pretending to be administration. Snow hadn't stopped since the death certificate dried. Marla pressed for speed. Tradition, she said, but urgency trembled beneath the phrasing. The casket arrived small, too white against all that white. The undertaker asked questions. Ethan's stare answered none. The cemetery,
already half buried, waited like a throat about to swallow regret. No choir, no sunlight, only the sound of shovels rearranging guilt. Reverend Mercer rehearsed brevity. Even faith knew not to linger here. Tanner fidgeted beside his mother, unaware of the arithmetic of loss around him. At the forest edge, unseen, Shadow waited, breath frosting air into warnings. Beneath the earth's frozen crust, Lily's heartbeat moved slower than prayer, but it moved. The wolf heard what humans ignored, a rhythm insisting the story was unfinished. Martha Vale hadn't slept in 3 nights. Guilt sat in her chair, drank her tea, wore her robe. Through her frosted kitchen window, she had watched Ethan mix something into the child's milk, had seen him cry afterward, had chosen silence. Now the wolf's howls gnawed at her conscience like rats on timber. She heard them echo through pipes and dreams. Each note carried a question: how long can fear outweigh truth? When the funeral announcement reached her mailbox, she packed her courage in layers: wool, flannel, resolve, and walked toward redemption disguised as storm. Snow blinded her path but clarified her purpose. By the time she reached the cemetery gate, her heart's rhythm matched the wolf's warning. Conscience, she realized, never forgives interest. It compounds daily until confession becomes the only affordable currency.
The procession moved through White Ridge Cemetery like a slow fracture in glass, measured, inevitable. Shadow watched from timberline, body low, eyes fixed on the coffin's shimmer through snowfall. Wind carried the scent of pine, diesel, and deceit. Beneath that, a faint heartbeat beat against the snow's muffled acoustics. His hackles lifted, his muscles coiled. Around him, ravens flapped in abrupt silence, retreating to higher witnesses. The first spade struck frozen soil with a metallic cry. Shadow stepped forward, each movement erasing distance and hesitation. Nature rarely interrupts ritual, but this wasn't interference. It was correction. By the time the second shovel rose, the forest had already decided to reclaim one of its own. They saw him too late. A white blur detached from trees, wind carving his outline in ice. 50 mourners scattered, black coats exploding into motion. Shouts tangled with prayer. Sheriff Briggs reached for his weapon, but instinct stalled him again. Snow erupted under paws heavier than justice. The coffin's flag whipped loose, stars dimmed against gray sky. Cameras caught only fragments: claws, breath, chaos. The moment myth collided with evidence. Marla screamed something that melted midair. Ethan froze, as if confession could hide behind stillness. The wolf cleared the final headstone and landed beside the coffin, steam rising from his body like smoke from absolution. The world's rhythm skipped, confused which heartbeat to follow.
Ethan's eyes met the wolf's, and for an instant he recognized lineage, his brother's courage staring back through a different species. Shadow's snarl was low, measured, not threat but indictment. Around them, snow spiraled like ash over battlefield remains. Ethan stepped backward, boots sinking into the past. He saw himself reflected in those blue eyes: coward, conspirator, unwilling executioner. Marla grabbed his arm, nails biting through cloth, tethering him to guilt. Shadow advanced one step, breath ghosting between them. Silence roared louder than any sermon. Ethan's body remembered the creek where Henry once saved him. Drowning felt familiar. He dropped his gaze first, proof of species hierarchy: man beneath wolf, sin beneath instinct. Without warning, Shadow bit the corner of the folded flag and pulled. Stars dragged through snow, stripes darkened with moisture and memory. Gasps erupted, sacrilege and salvation intertwining. The coffin lid gleamed under raw daylight, unblessed by fabric or pretense. The wolf released the flag gently, sat back, and stared at the men with shovels. Invitation or command, no one knew. Reverend Mercer clutched his Bible tighter. Pages trembled as though even scripture feared contradiction. Sheriff Briggs took one step forward, felt the world tilt toward decision. The wolf's head tilted too, synchronization too perfect to dismiss. Somewhere behind, Martha's voice rose above wind, thin, cracking, unstoppable. "Wait," she cried, and time obeyed.
Truth, when delayed, erupts without elegance. Martha's words tumbled through frost, brittle yet burning. She confessed to seeing Ethan poison the child, to cowardice that festered, to silence that nearly became murder. The crowd shifted, shock, denial, then alignment. Marla's mouth opened but produced no language. Ethan sagged as if confession had been contagious. Shadow turned his gaze toward the sheriff, then back to the coffin, his meaning clear as any translation. The wind paused between gusts, listening. Reverend Mercer lowered his head. Prayer wasn't needed anymore. Justice had already spoken through older rituals. Martha finished, voice spent, knees trembling but spirit steady. Every lie in White Ridge exhaled and froze midair, visible for once. Two men stepped forward, Sheriff Briggs and Noah Beckett, a former Marine drawn by instinct stronger than curiosity. They unclasped the latches, metal snapping like brittle nerves. The lid rose, exhaling cold breath that smelled faintly of medicine and miracle. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the smallest tremor beneath blankets. Nurse Porter lunged, fingers to neck, pulse faint but rhythmic. "Alive," she whispered, though nobody breathed to hear it. Shadow exhaled once, a sound between growl and sigh, and lowered his head to rest beside hers. Around them, hysteria shifted to awe. Snow resumed its fall, this time gentle, as if the sky had decided to applaud quietly.
Chaos followed logic's return. Deputies moved through the crowd, law rediscovering purpose. Ethan didn't resist. He seemed relieved to be handled, boundaries finally external again. Marla fought like someone allergic to consequence, her shrieks dissolving into sleet. Dr. Cross tried to vanish into the background, but guilt has a scent Shadow recognized. He growled once, directing attention. Handcuffs snapped, the sound harmonized with prayer bells from a distant church. Cameras captured every angle, but none could record the weight lifting from the frozen ground. Lily's stretcher passed between sins undone. The wolf walked beside it, self-appointed honor guard. Some witnesses wept without knowing for whom. As the ambulance doors closed, a single sound fractured the air, a whine so soft it carved hearts open. Shadow pressed his muzzle against the glass until fog bloomed under his breath. Inside, Lily's fingers twitched, a reflex or recognition, no one could tell. The sirens wailed again, moving toward the horizon where dawn waited uncertain. The crowd remained, statues under snowfall, faces turned toward the wolf who refused applause. When the last light disappeared, he turned back to the forest, paws silent over sacred ground. The cemetery, momentarily holy, resumed being merely cold. But somewhere beneath the snow, forgiveness stirred like spring rehearsing its lines.
Snow turned to rain by the time the ambulance reached White Ridge Medical Center. Inside, machines translated miracles into data. Lily's pulse steadied, hesitant but alive. Outside her window, Shadow refused to leave, his body half buried in slush. He drank from puddles, ignored food, eyes fixed on the faint outline of her bed through glass. Nurses whispered myths between rounds. Even cynics stopped shooing him away. The town gathered quietly each dawn, headlights pointing toward his vigil. Faith doesn't always live in churches. Sometimes it curls its tail under exhaustion and keeps watch. Inside, Reverend Mercer touched the girl's hand, whispering gratitude not to God, but to instinct. The monitors blinked in time with the wolf's breathing, machine and mammal synchronizing into one definition of loyalty. At 4:03 a.m., lab results printed the truth no one wanted in ink. Dioxin levels 4 times therapeutic range. Poison, deliberate. Dr. Mei Chen read it twice, each repetition colder. She followed protocol, sealed samples, called Sheriff Briggs, but her voice shook, not from fear, but fury. In every heartbeat she saved, this one violation felt personal. She returned to Lily's room, eyes burning, protective as flame around candlelight. Through the window, Shadow's silhouette waited, eternal. Chen pressed a hand to the glass. It fogged exactly where his muzzle rested. "Keep her safe," she murmured, surprised at her own prayer to biology. Then she turned to face paperwork sharp enough to cut reputations open. Truth, she knew, was surgical. It removed illusions with precision and never apologized for the scars. Fluorescent rooms replaced snow. Interrogation tables gleamed sterile. 2 chairs per sin. Ethan broke first. Time compressing confession into avalanche. 45 minutes of tears, incoherence, self-loathing. He spoke of pressure, of Tyler's sickness, of choices disguised as mercy. Sheriff Briggs listened without pity. Justice requires stillness, not sympathy. Meanwhile, Marla sat next door, silent, arms crossed, heartbeat steady, her poker face born from years of manipulation. Cameras blinked red in corners, witnesses impartial. Ethan's words spilled like thawed river water. Dr. Cross, the diner, the envelopes. Every sentence corroded the lie one layer deeper. When he finished, silence returned, heavier than guilt itself. Briggs clicked off the recorder. Truth finally had a voice, but redemption remained unscheduled. Deputies raided the farmhouse by dawn, flashlights slicing through ghosts. What they found wasn't just evidence, it was biography. A locked drawer behind canned peaches, ledger filled with neat arithmetic of deception. Secret accounts, unsent emails, receipts from pawned heirlooms. Marla had been saving money while pretending to lose it, rehearsing tragedy to perfection. In the attic, an old laptop glowed weakly, draft messages to Dr. Cross, full of flattery and control. Beside it, a child's drawing. Lily, Tanner, and a white wolf under a sun that refused to set. The juxtaposition made hardened deputies pause. Evil rarely looks monstrous. It's organized, alphabetized, and properly filed. Sheriff Briggs closed the book softly, as if noise might awaken whatever conscience still slept inside its pages.
When Briggs showed Ethan the ledger, comprehension arrived like lightning, instant, devastating. He realized Tyler had never been sick. Every sacrifice, every bottle emptied in guilt, every whispered apology had been built on fiction. Marla hadn't saved their family, she'd auctioned its soul. Ethan folded forward on the interrogation table, forehead to cold metal, sobbing soundlessly. His breath fogged the surface, forming and erasing his reflection in cycles. Sheriff Briggs let the silence run. Punishment had already started its work. Ethan whispered one name, Lily, and it wasn't confession anymore. It was a plea for permission to still exist. Outside the window, dawn smeared pale light across the mountains, mercy pretending to be mourning. Evelyn Cross sat alone in the holding room, wrists cuffed, dignity fractured into arithmetic. Years, losses, debts. The fluorescent hum above her synced with the pulse at her temple. She wasn't angry now, just empty. Vengeance, she realized, had the same aftertaste as grief, metallic,
endless. Sheriff Briggs read her charges without inflection. She listened politely, doctor's posture still intact. When he finished, she asked for one mercy, to see the child once, to apologize. Request denied. For the first time in years, tears breached professionalism. As deputies led her away, she glimpsed through a window the silhouette of a wolf sitting in snow, unblinking. For a fleeting, impossible second, she thought she saw her son's eyes reflected there, forgiving her in a language she'd forgotten.
March turned the valley to mud and attention. Reporters invaded White Ridge. Satellites blinked above like new constellations of curiosity. The courthouse overflowed. Locals, journalists, believers, skeptics, all orbiting the miracle child and her ghost guardian. Inside, testimony unfolded. Charts, photographs, recordings. Marla's expression remained marble. Ethan's voice cracked until even the stenographer trembled. Shadow's image projected on courtroom monitors, muzzle frosted, eyes fierce, became symbol for everything incorruptible. Reverend Mercer sat in the back row, rosary forgotten in his hand, whispering that sometimes God delegates. Each verdict read like weather forecasts, inevitable, cleansing. Truth doesn't roar when it wins, it exhales. Outside, protesters held candles instead of signs, honoring instinct over intellect. The defense tried to thaw her image. It failed. Marla testified with detachment that chilled even jurors accustomed to cruelty. "I did what I had to," she said, voice surgical. No remorse, only rationale. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop. Tyler's photograph lay on the evidence table, his innocent grin and indictment sharper than any attorney's words. Prosecutors described manipulation layered with patience, the orchestration of greed disguised as crisis. Cameras clicked like insects feeding. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Marla barely blinked. 25 years, no parole. She left the courtroom with the grace of someone mistaking punishment for misunderstanding. Outside, snow began to fall again, as if the sky still pitied those incapable of warmth.
When it was Ethan's turn, the courtroom softened. He pleaded guilty before his lawyer could finish strategy. His statement was halting, broken, human. That love, warped by desperation, becomes its opposite. That cowardice, when baptized in guilt, still burns. The judge, old enough to remember mercy's texture, offered the smallest version. 20 years, parole in 12. Ethan thanked him through tears that felt unearned. From the gallery, Reverend Mercer nodded once. Absolution always begins with surrender. Outside, Shadow waited by the steps, unbothered by flashes or voices. When deputies escorted Ethan out, the wolf stood, eyes steady. Ethan met them briefly, and in that silent exchange, forgiveness traded hosts. By evening, sentences became headlines, then history. White Ridge exhaled for the first time in months. Reporters packed, snowplows cleared, the town returned to its smaller heartbeat. But inside the hospital, Lily still slept between worlds, machines whispering her name. Shadow remained stationed beneath her window, fur rimed with frost, a sentinel unwilling to retire. Sheriff Briggs stopped by each night, hat off, saying nothing. Justice had been served, yet peace hadn't signed the same papers. On the fifth night, Lily's hand twitched, as if brushing the fur she couldn't reach. Outside, Shadow raised his head to the sky and howled, not mournful this time, but triumphant, the sound of an oath fulfilled. The valley carried it for miles, into places where guilt had once grown.
The fifth dawn arrived without promise, just persistence. Then, against every prognosis, Lily's eyelids fluttered. Machines responded before nurses did, alarms translating miracle into data. Her first inhale sounded like paper tearing, a fragile declaration of ownership over life. Outside, Shadow lifted his head as if summoned by breath itself. Snow melted around his body despite the cold. Faith, apparently, had temperature. Dr. Chen entered, disbelief reshaping into awe. "She's coming back," she whispered, though the girl was already halfway here. In hallways, staff paused to listen, unsure what they heard, hope or heartbeat. The wolf's shadow stretched across the window, long enough to touch her bed. For the first time since death tried to claim her, Lily smiled. Noah Beckett, the former Marine who'd opened her coffin, arrived with hesitation heavy as armor. Lily sat propped against pillows, a tiny ivy forest surrounding her. He pulled a chair close, unsure how to begin. He told her everything: the poison, the lies, the wolf's defiance. He didn't censor the cruelty. Truth deserved full oxygen. Lily listened silently, blue eyes absorbing rather than judging. When he finished, she looked past him to the frost-marked window where Shadow waited. Her expression didn't crumble, it clarified. Sometimes innocence isn't ignorance, it's resilience, refined by tragedy. Noah left the room lighter, as though confession had found its rightful heir. Behind him, Lily whispered something too soft for ears, but the wolf outside turned toward the sound.
2 days later, she asked to write letters. One to her uncle, one to herself. The first began with honesty sharp as winter. "You hurt me, but I survived anyway." The second, softer. "Forgive the world quickly, or it will keep you." Nurses found her asleep over the pages, pen still in hand, sunlight pooling like gold armor across her blanket. Outside, Shadow slept too, one paw twitching as if dreaming of running beside her again. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a decision repeated every time memory reopens its mouth. Lily made that choice early, maybe too early for her age, but perfectly timed for her soul. When she woke, she folded the letters carefully, as if they might break if handled without reverence. By autumn, legal documents caught up to destiny. Noah and his wife, Sarah, signed the final papers making Lily their daughter. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and new beginnings. Outside, leaves turned bronze, proof that even death-colored things can be beautiful. Tanner, once her cousin, now her brother, held her hand like a promise. Reporters wanted photos, but Noah declined. "Some stories aren't for headlines," he said, voice steady with earned peace. Shadow waited by the truck, tail moving slow, ceremonial. When Lily stepped out, he circled once, brushing her coat with his flank, anointing her with belonging. The town clapped quietly. Even Sheriff Briggs wiped his eyes behind mirrored sunglasses. Redemption, it seemed, had finally signed its own paperwork.
Ethan's letters began arriving in November. Pages creased, handwriting uneven. He wrote of memories before greed, of fishing trips, of songs his brother used to hum. He never asked forgiveness. He only sent pieces of humility wrapped in regret. Lily read them aloud to Tanner, her voice steady, her eyes kind. "He's learning," she said, as if mercy were a subject one could major in. Noah watched her from the porch, marveling at the child who could turn pain into curriculum. Each letter ended the same: "Be better than I was." Shadow lay at her feet, eyes half closed, as though approving the syllabus. Somewhere inside prison walls, a man felt lighter without understanding why. Winter returned bearing elegy. Martha Vale died quietly in her sleep, heart spent, but conscience clean. The town gathered in modest grief. Her funeral smelled of pine and absolution. Lily placed a single white rose on the coffin and whispered thanks for the voice that had broken the silence, years too late, but minutes in time. Among Martha's belongings, they found a note for the girl. "Fear is just love asking for courage." She also left her wedding ring, thin gold band worn down by devotion. Lily wore it on a chain, the circle resting against her pulse. Shadow stood at the edge of the service, distant yet present. Snow fell soft, forgiving even memory.
Dr. Ortiz arrived from Missoula with evidence, impossible yet perfect. DNA from Shadow's blood matched partial sequences from military records. Captain Henry Hollis's canine partner, Rex. The wolf was his descendant. the soldier's dog reborn through wild lineage. In the lab report, science called it hybridization. In White Ridge, they called it grace. Noah listened stunned while Lily simply nodded, as if she'd always known. Legacy, after all, rarely asks permission. The story spread nationwide again. Fallen soldier's wolf saves his daughter. Reporters camped outside, chasing angles Faith had already covered. Shadow ignored them all, content with the quiet job of breathing near those he loved. Bloodlines, it seemed, could carry memory if loyalty burned hot enough. White Ridge changed after the storm. The cemetery gained new visitors. Children left apples on Lily's headstone before learning she'd never needed one. The hospital added a new policy: no burial without triple verification. Schools taught ethics using her story. Even skeptics spoke softer near forests. Sheriff Briggs retired, leaving his badge on Lily's porch with a note, "For the bravest witness I ever met." Faith and law had finally agreed on one case. Shadow's howls became the town's clock, marking hours of gratitude. Every time snow began to fall, windows opened, people listened, and for a brief moment, humanity and wilderness shared the same language again.
1 year later, Christmas returned as benediction. Inside the Reynolds farmhouse, laughter replaced echoes. Lily hung ornaments with Tanner, each glass bulb reflecting new family in miniature. Sarah, belly round with miracle pregnancy, hummed carols off-key. Noah carved turkey, eyes soft with disbelief that peace could taste so simple. By the fire, Shadow dozed, fur silvering, muzzle grayer but eyes unchanged. Outside, snow whispered across fences, stitching the land closed where it had once torn open. They toasted absent names: Henry, Martha, even Ethan, and no bitterness followed. The wolf opened one eye, watching the family framed by firelight, then closed it again, satisfied. For the first time since the cemetery, no one feared silence. Near midnight, Lily stepped onto the porch, stars sharp as glass above her. Shadow joined her, body slow but spirit unbroken. She pressed her hand into his fur, warmth against winter. "We made it," she whispered, though words weren't necessary. From the forest edge came a sound, soft, high, new. A small white pup emerged, blue eyes luminous, watching the farmhouse. Shadow lifted his head and answered with one gentle howl, not warning, but welcome. The pup disappeared into trees, promise deferred. Inside, bells chimed midnight. Lily looked up at the stars, certain her parents could finally rest. Snow began again, erasing old tracks, keeping only the new ones. The story closed not with silence, but with breath, steady, human, eternal.